Welcome to the Haunting Hour. Tonight, you'll hear a collection of true scary stories for sleep that came from people around the world that are perfect for a dark, rainy night. These stories are unsettling, mysterious, and all claim to be true. Whether you're here to sleep or stay up with the lights on, settle in, relax, and listen closely. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Let me know which story you enjoyed the most. I grew up in a rental house tucked behind a row of gas stations and old warehouses at the edge of a town no one ever really talked about. My dad worked nights as a security guard for a freight company across the highway, and my mom cleaned houses during the day, so I spent most afternoons and evenings alone. It wasn't neglect, exactly. It was just how we lived. I got good at being quiet and invisible, especially after school let out. There was a small spare bedroom down the hallway, right across from mine. My parents never put anything in it. No furniture, no boxes, no curtains, just beige carpet, yellowing walls, and a smell like wet cardboard. I never liked walking past that room. Even when the lights were on, it felt cold, like the air inside wasn't connected to the rest of the house. I didn't say anything about it for a long time. Around the time I turned 8, I started drawing. Not cartoons or animals like other kids, just the same shape over and over. A long, narrow person with no face and arms that stretched too low. I'd draw it on notebook paper with thick black crayon, sometimes using so much pressure the crayon snapped. I didn't know why I kept doing it. I just did. I never showed my parents. I hid the pictures under my mattress until they started piling up. Then I moved them into an old shoebox. I remember once trying to draw something different. A dog, I think. But my hand kept slipping, and before I realized it, I was back to drawing that shape again. My mom found one of the pages on the floor once. She glanced at it, laughed, and asked if I'd been watching scary movies again. I told her no. That part was true. The first time I noticed anything strange, I was getting ready for bed. I flipped off the hallway light and caught something in the spare room. Just a blur of black against the wall, gone before I could focus on it. I stood there a second longer, squinting. Nothing moved. I told myself it was a shadow from the porch light outside. I went to bed and pulled the blankets up past my ears. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in the spare room, barefoot on the cold carpet. The walls looked darker than usual, like they were wet. In my left hand, I held a sheet of paper. In my right, a crayon. But I wasn't drawing. I was just standing there, staring at the far wall. When I woke up, my fingers were stained black, and the trash can beside my bed was full of new drawings. It kept happening. A few times a week. Always the same. I'd go to sleep, have the dream, then wake up with my hands covered in wax and new pictures in the trash. I never remembered drawing them. They were all identical. The same shape, same position, same expressionless face. At some point, I started locking my bedroom door at night, but it didn't change anything. The drawings still appeared. One day after school, I came home to find the shoebox emptied out and scattered across the hallway. Not torn or thrown, just laid out in a perfect line, stretching from my room to the spare room door. I froze. I remember standing there, my backpack still slung over one shoulder, just staring at that line of pages. The door to the spare room was cracked open, maybe 2 inches. The air around it felt wrong, like I was standing near a freezer vent. I wanted to call for my dad, but I knew he wouldn't be home until after midnight. My mom was working late. I was completely alone. I backed into my room, closed the door, and sat against it until it got dark. I didn't pick the drawings up. I didn't want to touch them. The next morning, the hallway was clean. Every page was gone. I checked the trash, the shoebox, even under my bed. Nothing. It was like they'd been vacuumed out of the house. I asked my mom casually if she'd cleaned up anything in the hallway, and she just shook her head. Said she hadn't even been upstairs. After that, I started sleeping with the light on. I told myself it helped, but the dreams kept happening. The pictures came back. One morning, I found one taped to the inside of my closet door. I didn't tape it there. The edges were jagged, like it had been torn from the middle of a stack. I started seeing it during the day, never full on, just quick flashes. A shape through the bathroom mirror when I was brushing my teeth. A reflection in the microwave door. Once, I saw a long handprint on the foggy glass of the shower, even though no one had used it in hours. I'd wipe them off, and they'd reappear the next day. Same size, same spacing between the fingers. I stopped telling myself it was in my head when I woke up one afternoon sitting on the floor of the spare room, crayon clutched in my hand, carpet smeared with black wax. I hadn't remembered going in. My parents were still at work. I stood up, legs trembling, and realized I'd been drawing on the wall. Not on paper, not in a sketchbook. Directly onto the wall. Hundreds of overlapping shapes, all the same. All faceless. All staring straight ahead. I scrubbed until my knuckles bled, but I couldn't get them off. I pushed a bookshelf in front of that wall and didn't go back in again. I kept the door shut after that. Every night. But sometimes I'd still hear it creak open. Just a few inches. Just enough. One night, I left a stack of books behind the door to keep it shut. The next morning, they were gone. Not pushed aside. Gone. I never found them. I started sleeping downstairs on the couch. My parents thought I was going through a phase. I let them. I didn't have words for what I was feeling. I was scared to be alone, but more scared to be with whatever was in that room. I couldn't explain how sometimes I'd walk by and feel something pressing against the other side of the door, like a person holding their breath. The worst moment came late one Sunday evening. I was about to head to bed when the power flickered and went out. The silence that followed was absolute. No fridge hum, no AC rumble, just silence. I stood in the living room, unsure what to do when I saw a light upstairs, faint and pulsing, coming from the spare room. I walked to the bottom of the stairs. My mouth was dry. My chest felt tight. Every part of me wanted to leave the house, but my legs carried me up, one step at a time. The hallway smelled different, like old paper and burnt plastic. When I reached the top, I saw it clearly. The door to the spare room was wide open. Light spilled out, pale and flickering, like the kind from a dying flashlight. I stepped inside. The walls were covered. Every inch, floor to ceiling, lined with my drawings. Hundreds of pages taped and pressed into the drywall, all of them staring back. And in the center of the room, taped over the window, was one single drawing different from the rest. It showed me. Not the shape, not the faceless thing. Just me, sitting on the floor, eyes wide, mouth open. The detail was rough, but the fear was unmistakable. I turned and ran out of the room, didn't stop until I was outside, barefoot on the driveway. I waited for my parents there, arms wrapped tight around my knees. I didn't go back inside until they got home. The next day, the drawings were gone again. The room was empty. My parents asked what happened to the bookshelf, and I just shook my head. I didn't tell them about the light or the smell or the drawing on the window. I didn't know how. We moved a few months later. My dad got a better job across the state, and my mom was just happy to have a fresh start. I didn't argue. I packed up my room, careful not to bring anything from under the bed or behind the bookshelf. I left the shoebox. I didn't want to know if it was still there. The new house was better, brighter. I didn't have dreams for a long time. I started sleeping with the lights off. I even got a dog. Things were good. For a while. Then last week, while cleaning out the garage, I found an old box marked books. It wasn't one I'd packed. Inside, under a layer of dust and yellowed paperbacks, was a single drawing, folded once down the middle. The crayon lines were faded, but I knew the shape instantly. The tall, narrow figure. No face, arms low, standing just beside a smaller figure, one that looked just like me. This time, the tall one had its hand on my shoulder. The summer after my sophomore year was the last time I felt normal. I didn't know it then, of course. None of us did. Back then, it was just me, Calvin, and Drew trying to find something, anything, to break up the endless stretch of nothing that came with being 16 in a town that emptied out after dark. We'd already done the usual stuff, trespassed at the old quarry, messed around in the woods behind the train tracks, even tried sleeping in a car parked halfway up the ridge just to scare ourselves. But by mid-July, it all felt stale. It was Drew who found the website. He wouldn't say how. It wasn't on the main internet. It looked like something made in the early 2000s. Gray background, no menu, no branding. Just a long wall of text describing something called the threshold test. It read more like an initiation than a game. There was no mention of rewards, no goal, just a process. It dared you to try it. Said if you followed the instructions perfectly, you'd know the truth. That phrase stuck with me. You'll know the truth. The steps were simple, but weird. It said you had to do it at a place you used to feel safe in, but no longer do. You had to be alone, completely alone. Midnight was essential. No lights, no talking. Sit in a corner and wait exactly 13 minutes. Then leave the room without turning your back. Calvin was the first to laugh. This is some edgy Reddit crap. But Drew was already copying the steps into his phone. He had that look again, the one he got when he was too quiet for too long. I should have stopped him. I didn't. That weekend, we picked his grandpa's old trailer. It hadn't been used in years. His family still owned it, but nobody had touched it since the old man died. We parked down the road and hiked up just after 11:30. The grass was overgrown. The porch sagged under our weight. A few bugs darted past the broken screen door as we stepped inside. The place smelled like old plastic and soil. There were still family photos on the walls, faded and stuck in crooked frames. I saw Drew glance at one before turning away. Calvin just rolled his eyes and kicked a beer can across the floor. We decided Drew would go first since it was his idea. Calvin and I waited outside, sitting on the steps, pretending we weren't cold. The wind carried the occasional sound from inside, a creak here, something like a sigh. I checked my phone. 12:17, exactly 13 minutes. We stood. Drew didn't come out. We waited. 1 minute, 2. Then Calvin knocked. No answer. He tried the door. It was stuck. When we finally pushed it open, Drew was standing near the back hallway, not moving, just standing. His flashlight lay on the floor, beam aimed into nothing. When he turned to look at us, his face was blank. Not afraid, not angry, just wiped clean. "Hey," Calvin said, trying to sound casual. "You good?" Drew blinked, then walked past us and out the door. Not a word, just left. The next morning, he didn't respond to any messages. He wasn't online. That wasn't unusual. Drew disappeared sometimes when he got in his moods. But there was something different this time. I called him around noon. His phone rang 5 times before going to voicemail. That night, we stopped by his house. His car was in the driveway, but no one answered the door. 2 days later, he finally texted. Just one sentence. "I don't think I was supposed to see that." That was it. He wouldn't say anything else. Calvin joked about it. Said it was probably just Drew being dramatic, looking for attention. But he looked shaken too. He didn't suggest trying the ritual again. Not until the following week. I don't know what pushed him. Maybe boredom. Maybe ego. He said he didn't believe any of it, but I could tell that wasn't true. We'd all seen Drew's face that night. Whatever happened in that trailer, it changed him. Calvin chose the storage unit behind his uncle's hardware store. He said he used to play there as a kid, but hadn't been back since the place got robbed 3 years ago. I didn't argue. I stood by the gate while he slipped inside, using the spare key his uncle kept in a magnetic box under the truck bumper. I watched him go in, flashlight flicking once before the metal door rolled down. Then I waited. The night was still. No cars passed. No voices in the distance. Just crickets and the occasional groan of cooling metal from the nearby dumpsters. Exactly 13 minutes later, the unit door rolled back up. Calvin stood inside, mouth slightly open, eyes wide. He didn't move. "Cal?" I said. He turned, slowly, like he'd forgotten how to use his body. I asked him what he saw. He didn't answer, just walked past me to his car, got in, and drove off. I stood there alone, breathing hard, listening to the hum of the nearby power lines. The next day, he texted me too. "Don't do it." I asked why. No response. 2 nights later, I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd get this image. Something sitting in the hallway just outside my bedroom door. Not moving, not making a sound, just waiting. I knew if I opened the door, I'd see it. I never opened the door. That Friday, I decided to try it. I didn't tell anyone, not even Drew, who still wasn't replying. I chose the basement of my childhood home. We'd moved out 3 years earlier, after my dad's breakdown. The place had been rented out since, but that week it happened to be empty. The new tenants were due to move in on Monday. I used the spare key, stepped inside, and walked down the stairs without turning on any lights. My shoes left faint prints in the dust. The air felt dense, like it hadn't been breathed in a long time. I picked the far corner, the one behind the furnace, and sat with my knees pulled in, phone off, watch in my pocket. 13 minutes. No talking, no light, no turning around. The first 5 minutes were quiet. Then I started to feel it. A shift in the pressure around me, like something had entered the space even though I couldn't hear a thing. I told myself it was just air currents, old ducts creaking. But then I heard breathing, shallow, wet. It was behind me. I wanted to turn around so badly I thought I'd snap, but I didn't. I stayed still, every muscle locked. When the time came, I stood, walked slowly toward the stairs, and left the room without looking back. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found a scratch on the back of my shoulder. Thin, shallow, like a fingertip traced along my skin. Things didn't go back to normal. Drew stopped going to school. His family said he was dealing with something personal, but no one saw him again. Not in person. His social media went dark. Calvin transferred to an alternative program the next county over. His mom said he needed a smaller environment. I knew better. As for me, I started seeing the same time appear everywhere. Midnight plus 13 minutes. The microwave, my phone, my watch battery died and stayed frozen on 12:13 for 2 weeks before I threw it out. Sometimes I hear footsteps in the house, even when I'm alone. Sometimes I smell that same dusty air, like something old is breathing just behind me. I haven't been back to that basement. I haven't spoken to either of them since. The site is gone now. I tried finding it again last week, but every search leads to dead ends or error pages. Maybe it was taken down, maybe it never existed, I don't know. All I know is this: that test, whatever it really was, it didn't tell me the truth. It showed me something, yes, but truth isn't the right word. What I saw, what I felt, it was a presence, cold, patient, impossible to reason with, like I had pulled back a layer of the world and seen what wasn't meant to be seen. And now, every night, I wonder if it's still with me, waiting for me to sit in that dark corner again. I never told anyone about what happened in the house I grew up in. Not fully. Over the years, I've dropped bits of it into conversations, always with a joke, always vague. But there's a part of me that thinks if I don't put it down now, it'll disappear with me. And for reasons I don't fully understand, that feels dangerous. My childhood wasn't extraordinary on the surface. I lived in a quiet neighborhood on the northern edge of a working-class town, the kind of place where everyone cut their grass on Saturdays and put out plastic chairs in their front yards every summer. But my family was different. Not on the outside. We went to school, paid bills, smiled at neighbors, but behind our front door, we followed rules that no one else did. Every night, at exactly 6 o'clock, my mother would call us to the living room. No exceptions. Homework, TV, phone calls, it all had to stop. We'd gather around the coffee table, which she kept completely clear, and sit cross-legged on the floor. My father would bring in a small cardboard box, place it in the center, and then we'd wait. No one ever explained the purpose of the box. It wasn't a game or a holiday. It wasn't tied to any religion, at least not one I knew of. But every evening someone would open it. One of us kids. Inside would be a pair of socks. Always socks. Hand-stitched, mismatched, different sizes, some too big or too small. We never questioned them. We'd take turns choosing, and no matter who pulled the box open, we all had to wear the socks the next day. Even in the summer, even if they were itchy or didn't fit. My mother was firm about that. "It's important," she'd say. "You know why." But we didn't. My sister Emily was the one who started asking questions. She was always more curious than me, braver in a way that made adults uncomfortable. One night, after opening the box and pulling out a pair of thick wool socks in the middle of June, she muttered under her breath, "This is stupid." My mother didn't react right away. She just smiled and told Emily to put them on the dresser for morning. But that night, our father didn't join us for dinner. He stayed in the garage. We could hear the hum of his power tools long after we went to bed. The next morning, Emily's socks were gone. In their place, on the same dresser, were different ones, neatly folded, deep red, and far too small. She put them on without saying a word. We all noticed the blister on her heel by the end of the day. After that, she stopped complaining. Sometimes if you forgot to wear the socks or tried to swap with someone, things would happen. Not big things. Not at first. You'd lose something important. Your house key, your homework, a birthday invitation. Then the phone would ring in the middle of the night, but no one would be there. You'd hear footsteps in the attic, see lights under the closet door when it was shut. My brother once ignored the rule for 3 days in a row. On the 4th, he woke up with every sock he owned shredded into thin strips and stuffed into his pillowcase. That's when I realized it wasn't just about habit. There were consequences. I started keeping a notebook. I never told anyone, but every night after the ritual, I'd write down the date, the sock color, and who pulled from the box. I didn't know what I was looking for, maybe a pattern, maybe some clue, but I couldn't stop. I felt like if I missed a night, I'd lose track of something important, and then maybe something worse would happen. We weren't allowed to take the socks out of the house. If we had gym, we had to keep them in our lockers and change back after. My mother checked, always. I never saw her throw them away though. That part still bothers me. Every day, 3 or 4 new pairs appeared, and we never saw a single old pair again. I once tried to find them, searched every drawer, every hamper, nothing. It was like the socks only existed for a day. When I turned 12, things escalated. My cousin Mason came to stay with us for a week while his parents were overseas. He didn't know the rules, and we weren't supposed to tell him. That was the hardest part. Watching someone you care about walk into something they didn't understand and being told to stay silent. On his second night, he laughed when he saw the sock box. "What's this? Family sock club?" My mother just smiled and said, "It's tradition." He played along, picked a pair, wore them the next morning without much thought. The third night, he refused. "I'm not doing this again," he said. "They gave me hives." My mother didn't argue, just nodded. "That's your choice," she said. "We don't force anyone." That night, around 3 o'clock, we all woke up to the sound of Mason screaming. He was standing in the hallway, barefoot, holding his arms like they were on fire. When we turned on the light, I saw that his skin was covered in red lines. Not cuts, not burns, just rows and rows of lines like he'd been wrapped in something tight and abrasive. He kept shouting, "Get them off! Get them off!" My dad drove him to the hospital. They said it was a reaction to something environmental, maybe fiberglass insulation. No one mentioned the socks. Mason went home early. We never saw him again. After that, I never missed a night. It became automatic. Come 6 o'clock, we'd stop whatever we were doing, gather in the living room, open the box. Socks on the dresser by 7. Worn the next day, no questions, no comments. I stopped writing in my notebook after the incident with Mason. I realized the rules weren't meant to be understood. They were meant to be followed. Years later, I moved out for college. I asked my mom what would happen when I wasn't there to participate. She smiled and said, "Don't worry, you'll still get your socks." And I did. Every week, without fail, a small package would arrive at my dorm. No return address, just a pair of handmade socks wrapped in brown paper. The first time, I didn't wear them. Nothing happened that day. But the next morning, I woke up to find the socks in my bed, coiled around my pillow like something waiting. After that, I wore them. I wore them through college, through my first job, through my engagement, and the early years of marriage. I never explained them to my wife, just said they were a family thing. She stopped asking after the second year. Then came the week the package didn't arrive. I waited 2 days. Nothing. On the third night, I felt it, a weight in the apartment, like someone standing just outside the bedroom door. I got up, opened the front door, and found the package sitting on the doormat. No knock, no sound, just there. Inside were 2 pairs of socks. I understood immediately. One for me, one for her. I didn't say anything, I just left them out for her beside her shoes. That day I came home from work and saw them gone. I never asked. She never brought it up. We've been married 12 years now. We have a daughter. And every evening around 6 o'clock, we gather around our coffee table. I bring out a small box. We open it together. She chooses her socks. We put them out. We wear them the next day. I still don't know what started the tradition. I don't know what happens if you stop it completely. I just know what I've seen, what I remember. And I know that our daughter has never once tried to skip it. Because when she was 4, she asked if she could open the box early. We told her no, not until 6. That night we found her in the hallway, crying, one sock missing, her tiny foot covered in long red lines. We didn't punish her, we didn't raise our voices, we just waited until the next day. And that evening, at 6 o'clock, she opened the box herself. I used to think that when people said they felt watched, it was just anxiety. A leftover instinct from thousands of years ago when predators still stalked us at night. But after last winter, I know better. It started on a Thursday. I remember because I was supposed to meet a contractor that morning to look at the upstairs ceiling. There'd been a leak forming over the guest room for weeks, and I finally stopped putting it off. But the guy never showed. Around noon, I got a citywide alert on my phone. Shelter in place until further notice. Do not exit your residence. Avoid all contact with outside personnel. No explanation. A few minutes later, I saw helicopters flying overhead. Not search and rescue. These were dark gray, unmarked, and moving slow. I stepped out onto my porch for a better look, but the air hit different. Thick, dry, almost chemical. I went back inside, shut the door, and locked it. My phone buzzed again. Same message. Same warning. I turned on the news. Most local stations were either down or repeating vague statements about a containment issue in the North Industrial Zone. A reporter mentioned reactive gas instability and urged people to seal windows and stay put. There were no details, just a line repeating across the bottom of the screen. Do not engage with unverified individuals. That part stuck with me. I spent the rest of the day sealing the window frames with duct tape and stuffing towels under the doors. By the time night fell, the house was dark and quiet. Too quiet. Even the street dogs and crows that usually fought over trash bins were gone. I didn't sleep much. I remember lying in bed, listening for anything out of place. Around 3 o'clock, I heard a soft tapping on one of the windows downstairs. Just 3 quick knocks, then silence. I didn't move. In the morning, I found faint smudges on the glass. Not fingerprints, too wide, too uneven, like something had pressed a wet cloth against it and dragged it slowly down. I tried to rationalize it. Condensation, maybe, an animal brushing past. But deep down, I knew that wasn't right. By the second day, the house felt smaller. I kept the curtains closed, but I could sense something outside. Not people, not vehicles, just movement. Sometimes I'd catch a flicker of light from between the blinds, like someone walking with a flashlight, but the beams were too smooth, like they glided instead of swaying. Then came the phone call. The screen lit up with an unknown number. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. The voice on the other end was a woman, calm, measured. "Daniel," she said, "it's time to come outside." I froze. "Who is this?" "You know me," she said. "You just don't remember yet." There was a long pause, then the line went dead. I tried calling back, but the number didn't exist. I unplugged the phone after that. On the third day, I ran out of coffee. That's when the withdrawal headaches kicked in. Dull pressure behind my eyes, a stiffness in my jaw that made everything feel unreal. The lights in the hallway began to flicker, though I hadn't had electrical issues before. I stopped going upstairs entirely. The air felt heavier up there. That night, I heard footsteps on the back deck. Slow, deliberate, a creak, followed by the soft click of the doorknob testing itself. Then silence. In the morning, I found muddy footprints leading from the edge of the yard to the base of the deck steps. Barefoot, 5 toes, no shoes. I called the emergency number listed on the city alert. It rang 6 times before someone answered. I could hear movement on the other end, a low hum, almost mechanical. "Containment is active," the voice said. "Remain where you are. Do not respond to stimuli that acknowledge your presence by name." I asked what that meant. The line went dead again. On the 4th night, I tried to watch old movies to distract myself. The screen kept stuttering. Not buffering, just pausing for a fraction of a second every few minutes. Like someone was watching too and needed time to process. Then, around 10 o'clock, someone knocked at the front door. 3 knocks. Firm, then silence. I stood frozen in the hallway, phone in one hand, the other gripping a fireplace poker. A voice followed. Not panicked, just familiar. "Dan, I know you're there. Can you open up?" My stomach dropped. It was Kyle, but that was impossible. Kyle died 2 years ago. "Come on, man," the voice said. "It's freezing out here. I just need a minute." I didn't respond. A second knock, slower this time. Then, "You still drink that terrible instant coffee, remember? You used to say the bitterness made it feel real." My legs nearly buckled. I hadn't told anyone that. Not even the contractor who canceled. No one else knew. I backed away from the door. "Okay," the voice said. "Okay, maybe I'm early." Then came footsteps, not away from the door, but up the side of the house. I turned and ran to the bathroom, locked the door, sat in the tub, holding the poker across my chest. Minutes passed. Then a tap at the bathroom window. Just one. I didn't look. Eventually, I passed out from exhaustion. In the morning, everything seemed normal. The hallway light had stopped flickering, the electricity stabilized. I even got a weather update on my phone. Rain expected by 4 o'clock. No mention of the containment. I spent the next day cleaning, anything to stay busy. Around dusk, I went to take the trash out. The air was cooler. Still, I stood on the porch for the first time in days and felt a strange sense of relief. That's when I noticed the back gate was open. It wasn't swinging in the wind. It was propped open with a stone, and etched into the dirt beside it were 2 words, scrawled in uneven lines. "Let me no name." No punctuation. Just those words, written in a way that made my mouth go dry. I shut the gate, locked it. That night, I heard Milo again. Milo was the dog I had as a kid. He'd been gone for nearly a decade. But I swear, I heard the distinct sound of his tags clinking against the floorboards, his nails tapping along the hallway tile, the little huff he made when he settled under my bed. I turned every light on in the house, walked the halls, called his name even though I knew I shouldn't have. I found nothing, until I went to the bedroom and saw one of his old toys, shoved halfway under the bed like he'd dragged it there. But I'd thrown that toy away when I was 17. The final night is when it all fell apart. I was dozing off in the living room when the power went out. Not a flicker, just complete, instant dark. I stood up too fast, knocked over the lamp, and stepped on the broken bulb. Pain shot through my foot, but I couldn't stop. The front door was wide open. There was no wind, no movement, just silence. Then, from the kitchen, a voice. "Turn around." I didn't. I took a step forward. "Daniel," I said, "turn around." The air behind me shifted. I turned. There, in the doorway to the kitchen, stood a woman. Average height, white hair, pale coat, eyes completely dark, no whites, no pupils, just voids. She smiled. Her teeth were perfect, too perfect, polished like glass. She raised one hand and opened her fingers. Inside her palm was a photograph, old, weathered. It was me, as a child, standing on my front porch holding Milo. The photo was taken from the street. I'd never seen it before. She dropped it. Then she spoke, and her voice had two layers. One soft, almost childlike. The other deep, mechanical. "You left the gate open." She stepped forward. That's when Milo barked. The real Milo. From the hallway, from the exact spot I used to feed him. The bark was sharp, urgent. I spun to look, and in that instant, the lights came back on. The woman was gone. So was the photo. But Milo's collar lay on the floor, and it was warm. I had been on my feet for over 12 hours, and I remember thinking I didn't even feel tired anymore. Just hollow. I ran a small auto repair shop in a fading industrial town, one of those places where everyone either works too much or not at all. Thursdays were always long. Delivery day meant parts coming in from 3 different counties, and when half of them were mislabeled or missing, I had to stay late to sort through the mess. By the time I closed up, it was past 9 o'clock. The drive home took just under an hour, assuming nothing went wrong. I lived far from town, out past the river bend, near the edge of the conservation land. It wasn't because I liked nature. It was because land was cheap out there, and the neighbors never asked questions. I liked it that way. The only thing waiting at home was a microwave dinner and the sound of my own breathing. I stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and turned off the porch light. The silence felt heavier than usual, not peaceful, more like held breath. I brushed it off. It had been a long week. I remember heating the food and sitting down with it at the table. I don't remember finishing. One minute I was cutting into the plastic with a fork. The next I was waking up with my head against the table, a deep ache blooming behind my eyes. The ringtone pulled me out of the fog. It was old, something from the first phone I ever owned. I hadn't heard it in years. Somehow it still played. Caller ID. Bethany. Home? My sister. Her voice was shaking. I could barely understand her at first. Just fragments. Stairwell, collapsed, emergency responders. Her husband, David, had died, just like that. Fell through a rotted plank in the old tenant building he was inspecting. David had been my closest friend since we were kids. We shared everything from broken bones to first jobs. He was the one who convinced me to get certified for repairs, loaned me money for my first truck, helped me move out here, and now he was gone. I sat in silence, no tears, just a cold emptiness I didn't know how to fill. I opened the hall closet and pulled out the gray sweatshirt he gave me on my 30th birthday. I hadn't worn it in years. Still smelled faintly like sawdust and gasoline. I got in my truck, didn't pack anything, didn't leave a note. The main highway into town had been shut down recently for repairs, but I remembered a service road that curved through the backwoods. It wasn't maintained, but it would save me nearly 40 minutes. I turned onto it just before 11 o'clock. The gravel was loose, and the headlights barely reached beyond the curve. The forest here was thicker, darker than I remembered. No moon, no wind. Even the bugs were quiet. The further I drove, the more it felt like I'd crossed into somewhere else entirely. Then came the crash. A tree fell behind me, loud and sudden, the impact shaking the frame of the truck. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding. Through the mirror, I saw branches covering the road. The trunk had landed inches from my tailgate, and it wasn't broken. It had been cut. Clean. Someone had dropped it. I got out, flashlight in hand, and scanned the trees. Something moved on the left. Just a shape, too fast to see clearly. My first instinct was to call out. I didn't. Instead, I followed. Why? I don't know. Maybe I wanted someone to blame. Maybe I just couldn't stand being still. I stepped between the trees. The soil was damp, uneven. The beam of light shook in my hand as I moved further in. The woods swallowed the road noise completely. Then I heard the sound. It wasn't an animal. It was too deep, too wet, like a howl forced through something broken. I turned toward it and raised the flashlight. That was when I saw it. Tall, bipedal, covered in matted hair that clung to its limbs like oil. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side. The mouth was wide, too wide, like it had been carved open with a dull blade, and its eyes were sunken but aware. It looked right at me. My legs turned to ice. Then it moved. Not fast at first. It walked, heavy and deliberate, but when I stepped back, it lunged. It didn't run like a person. It jerked forward, limbs dragging, like something trying to remember how to chase. I ran. Hard. I could feel it behind me, breathing. No, saying something. It was trying to form my name. Ray-Ann. That voice didn't belong to it. It belonged to David. I stumbled behind a fallen log and crawled into a low patch of thickets. My breath caught in my throat as the thing passed inches from me. It smelled like burnt cloth and old meat. It stopped, sniffed the air, then moved on. I waited until I couldn't hear it anymore. Then I made the mistake of standing up too fast. My boot slipped, and I fell backward into what I thought was more brush. But it wasn't. It was a pit. I landed hard on a soft layer of what I thought was soil. It wasn't. My flashlight rolled out of reach, its beam cutting sideways across a tangle of limbs and fabric. There were bodies, old ones, bones wrapped in shredded clothing. One still had a shoe on. Another had a jacket with a company logo, something I vaguely recognized. Local. I scrambled out, hands covered in something slick and warm. Back on my feet, I turned toward the trees, and that's when I saw headlights. My truck. It was parked right where I left it, but someone had just gotten out. A man, about my height, wearing a gray sweatshirt. He looked around, then reached into the bed of the truck and pulled out the flashlight I thought I'd lost years ago. Same dent, same flicker. He stepped into the woods, toward the left. I shouted, "Hey, stop!" He didn't flinch, didn't turn, just walked deeper into the forest. I ran after him, yelling his name, my name, but he kept going. The woods grew darker as I moved, the air pressing tighter against my chest. I never caught up to him. I don't remember getting back to the truck. I don't remember the drive into town, but I remember waking up the next morning in a motel parking lot. The sweatshirt was gone, my shoes were muddy, my hands smelled like metal. I checked the local news. David was still dead. The funeral was scheduled for Monday. I didn't go. I drove back to the service road a few days later. The tree was gone. The forest was quiet, nothing out of place. But every so often when I stand near a window at night, I think I see movement at the edge of the trees. A figure, wearing my clothes, holding my flashlight, looking for something. I haven't gone back since. I started working in pest control the year after I dropped out of college. It was supposed to be temporary, just something to cover rent while I figured things out. That was 6 years ago. The pay was decent, the hours were long, and no one bothered me. I liked that part. The guy I worked with most was named Darren. He was loud, kind of a slob, but reliable when it mattered. We spent most days crawling under porches or clearing roaches out of drain lines. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the bills paid. One Thursday afternoon, dispatch sent us to a house on the west side of the county. The ticket just said interior infestation, no details. When we pulled up, I noticed the windows were covered with newspaper from the inside. A guy answered the door, mid-30s, nervous. He kept scratching his arms and glancing behind us. He didn't say hello, just looked Darren in the eyes and said, "Don't let them bite you." Darren grinned. "Yeah, all right, man." "I mean it," the guy said. "Don't let them bite you. They're not regular." He stepped aside and let us in. The smell hit me first. Not rot, not mildew, sweet, like syrup left on a stovetop too long. It clung to the walls. I could feel it in my throat. Ants, thousands of them, covering the baseboards, the table legs, even the curtains. There was a visible trail winding through the hallway and up the wall into a vent. I turned to Darren. "We'll need the heavy fogger." He nodded and headed back to the truck. I started laying down the perimeter dust, just enough to control their movement before the gas went in. That's when I noticed something strange. The ants weren't reacting. Usually, they scatter or clump together when threatened. These ones kept moving, precise and undisturbed. The trail never broke. I knelt to get a closer look. They were carrying something. Not food scraps or eggs. Something small and fibrous, like hair. Darren came back, tossed me a mask and gave a low whistle. "Place is crawling." "You see what they're hauling?" He squinted. "Looks like fuzz, maybe insulation." I didn't argue. We set up the canisters and sealed off the kitchen, the hallway, and the living room. The fogger would take 2 hours, minimum. The homeowner said he'd stay in the garage. We waited in the van. Darren leaned back and propped his feet on the dash. "Ever see an ant nest inside a wall before?" "Yeah." "This bad?" "No." He laughed. "Reminds me of that time in Glaston. Remember? The dryer vent?" I didn't, but I let him talk. About an hour in, he stood up. "I'm checking the bedroom. We can't break seal yet. I'm just gonna peek." I didn't stop him. He disappeared inside. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I got out and knocked on the door. "Darren?" No answer. I opened it, holding my breath. The fog hadn't reached the far room yet. The air was warmer, thicker. That sweet smell was stronger here, almost cloying. "Darren?" I stepped into the bedroom. He was standing by the wall, unmoving, flashlight aimed at something. "You okay?" He didn't respond. I walked over. There was a hole in the drywall, rough, maybe 8 inches across. Inside, I could see movement. The ants were going in and out of the cavity, carrying more of that fibrous material. Darren leaned closer, then flinched. "One of them bit me," he said, holding out his arm. The skin was red, just a welt. "They're in the walls," I nodded. "We'll report it. Let's go." He didn't move. I grabbed his sleeve. "We can't stay in here." He backed away slowly. "Did you hear it?" "Hear what?" "Inside the wall, something scratched." The sound of the fogger canister kicking in saved me from answering. We left. That night, Darren didn't text. I figured he was just tired. We'd logged over 40 jobs that week. I went to bed early. The next day, he didn't show. I called twice. No answer. I went by his place. His car was parked outside, but the lights were off. I left a voicemail. By Monday, I was starting to worry. I stopped by again. This time, I knocked for 5 straight minutes. Eventually, I heard him. Doors open. Inside, the place was dark. The curtains were drawn. The air smelled like sugar and something else, something sour beneath it. Darren was lying on the couch, shirtless. His skin was covered in faint red marks, like scratches or bites. His eyes were glassy. He didn't sit up. "You all right?" He nodded slowly. "You look like hell." He smiled. "They're fixing me." I took a step back. "Who?" He raised one arm. A line of ants moved slowly down his shoulder. They were clustered around a scab near his elbow. I stared. "You need a doctor." "No, they know what to do." I left. I filed the report with the company, said he was sick, possibly reacting to a chemical. Dispatch reassigned me for the week. I tried to forget about it until Friday. My phone buzzed at 4:15 a.m. It was a voicemail, just static. Then Darren's voice, whispering, "It's inside. Don't scratch. It spreads when you scratch." I didn't go back to sleep. Later that morning, I drove back out to his place. No car, no answer. I let myself in. The living room was empty. No couch, no table, just piles of old clothing and plastic containers. The air was thick, unbearable. I followed the trail into the hallway, past the bathroom, to the back room. The walls pulsed, not literally, but it felt that way. The wallpaper bubbled in places. There were long, uneven seams along the corners, packed with a resinous material. I followed the largest trail to the closet door. Inside was Darren, or what was left. He was slumped in the corner, eyes open, unmoving. His stomach was distended. His arms were crossed over his chest, but his skin looked thin, transparent. Beneath it I saw movement. Ants, not dozens, hundreds inside him. I stepped back, hit the doorframe. He didn't flinch, but the ants responded. They began to pour from his sleeves, his mouth, even the corners of his eyes. I backed away, heart racing. That's when he blinked. I froze. His lips parted. A sound escaped, dry, breathless. "Don't let them bite you." I ran. Outside, I vomited in the yard. The house was condemned 3 days later. A team came in wearing full hazmat. I heard rumors, no details. The official report cited biohazard infestation. They never mentioned Darren. The company offered me 2 weeks off. I didn't argue. I stayed home, kept the windows shut, tossed every shirt with holes. I cleaned obsessively, and I never scratched. Even when the welts started showing up on my arms, even when I caught myself waking up with blood under my nails, even now when I feel movement beneath the skin, I tell myself it's nothing, just nerves, just healing. But sometimes, when the room goes quiet, I think I can hear it, a faint scratching from inside the walls. I never thought a box of old letters could change the way I see the world. But I also never expected to find myself at the center of something ancient, hidden, and still very much alive. It started when my friend Jameson brought me to his dad's storage shed. His father ran a small auction business, one of those outfits that buys up estate leftovers when someone dies with no heirs. Jameson said they'd found strange things before. Old guns, forgotten safes, even a jet ski once, but this was different. This was personal. There was a wooden box in the corner. It looked hand-built, heavy, stained dark, and warped from time. Inside were hundreds of letters, yellowing brittle, all addressed to the same 2 words, Mommy and Daddy. The handwriting was messy, like a child's. "Where'd your dad get these?" I asked. "Someplace outside Bluffwood," Jameson said. He didn't say much, didn't like the place. I reached for one of the letters. "Don't open that shit in here," Jameson warned. "My dad says that box gives him headaches." I laughed and opened one anyway. It was short. The writer's name was Danny. He said he'd gotten lost in the woods after following a deer. Said he'd found shelter with someone called the Gray Lady. She had a house in the forest made of mud and wood, and she promised to keep him safe until he could go home. There were hundreds more letters, and once I read one, I couldn't stop. I took the box home, laid the letters across my floor. They spanned decades, dates from the late 80s to the mid-90s, with gaps of weeks, months, sometimes years. Danny's tone changed over time. The early letters were hopeful. He missed his parents. He believed they'd find him. But as the years went on, he wrote about the Gray Lady's strange rituals, mud baths to scare off a creature she called the monster, bloody offerings left at the edge of the forest, and endless nights of singing, dancing, screaming. If he stopped, she punished him. At some point, she made him call her mommy. I started sleeping less, eating less. All I could think about were the letters. I messaged Jameson constantly, but he stopped replying. I went to his house one afternoon. He looked rough, tired, pissed off. "You need to let this go," he told me. "It's just some kid's fantasy or a crazy woman's story." He offered to help me burn the letters, said it might help clear my head. I agreed, but when it came time to throw them in the fire, I hesitated. Something in me resisted, violently. I ended up tackling Jameson, grabbing the box, and running to my car like a madman. That's when I knew something was wrong with me, but it didn't matter. I needed answers. One of the letters mentioned a name, Mrs. Everly, and that was the key. With some digging and help from Jameson's dad's records, I found the original property. An old house on the edge of the forest, recently auctioned off. I visited the place. The house was nothing special, but the forest behind it was quiet. Too quiet. And then I saw something move. Something tall, slender. Not quite man, not quite animal. It disappeared before I could get a good look. A woman on the property chased me off, but I came back later. She said her uncle let a man named Daniel Cerez live in a trailer on the edge of the land years ago. I tracked him down. He was older now, maybe in his 60s. Rough around the edges, but alive. I showed him the letters. He took them in silence. His hands trembled. "Where'd you get these?" he asked. I told him. Then I asked the question that had been burning in my chest. "Did you really kill her?" He nodded. "Good luck proving it," he muttered. "I don't think she ever existed on paper." I asked about the monster. The things he described in the letters. He waved me off. She was a lunatic. Drugged me with herbs and tea. Made me see things. The monster wasn't real. But something about the way he avoided my eyes told me he didn't believe that. Not really. A few days later, I found a letter on my porch. My name was on the envelope. Inside was a short note, handwritten, same handwriting as Danny's letters. "You want the truth?" it said, "then follow the deer." It gave instructions. Go into the woods, wait at a clearing, do not move. Follow the deer when it comes. I followed them. The forest was thick. The first clearing I found was full of tall grass and purple flowers. I sat down, waited. 1 hour passed, and then the deer appeared. It stared at me. Then it turned and walked into the trees. I followed. It led me to a cabin, old, sagging, hidden in a hollow. I almost turned back, but I didn't. Inside, the air was cold, still. A woman sat in the shadows. "Have a seat," she said. "You've read my letters. You've been very curious." Her voice was dry, her skin gray, her eyes clouded. "You're Mrs. Everly?" I asked. She smiled. "I was." I asked about Danny, about what she did to him. "I was alone," she said. "Then I saw him through the veil. I thought he could take my place." I stood. "You're insane," she laughed. "Maybe, but the monster isn't." A screech tore through the trees outside. It didn't sound human. It didn't sound natural. "You wanted to know more," she said. "It knows that. It wants you now." I ran. I don't remember how I got back to my car, but I haven't been the same since. There's something in the woods, something watching. And sometimes I still get letters. They're never addressed to me. They're always addressed to Mommy and Daddy. But I know they're meant for me now. I thought working the late shift at the diner was the worst part of my life until everything changed on that Tuesday evening. My name is Robert, and for 3 months I've been alone behind the counter, cleaning coffee mugs and wiping down stools after the last of the customers leave. The blue clock above the service window always feels like a countdown. I didn't mind. Then he started coming. He showed up at 9 o'clock sharp. No bell, no sound, just appeared in a booth I'd already cleaned. Dark overcoat, brimmed hat low over his eyes. He sat there waiting. I offered coffee once. He tilted his head but didn't answer. I poured. He sipped. Didn't move. I couldn't concentrate. My arms trembled while I wiped the counter. The clock ticked on. I told the manager it was nothing, just a regular guy. She nodded and punched the time card without looking. He came back the next night. Same booth, same silence. I started locking the door early. 8:55. Turned off the neon open sign. But he'd still be there when I left for the night, face illuminated in fluorescent yellow. Then she appeared. Tall woman in a gray overcoat, hair pinned back, no expression. She didn't order, just sat at the counter and watched my reflection in the stainless steel. Her eyes were too still, like polished stone. He looked at her. She looked back. They didn't speak. The clock has become my prison. 2:30 a.m. until 8 p.m., that blue clock has been my only focus. It kept me going. But every night, the mirror behind the counter would fog up just as it hit 7:59, like someone breathing hot air while standing behind me. I tried wiping it, but the condensation came faster than I could clear it. Then the lights flickered twice. Bright, then dim, on and off. Then the electric hum would stop, and everything froze. Every clock, every neon, every light fixture just stopped. And then it started again, always at 8, exactly 8 p.m. After the pause, the man and woman would be gone. I'd be drenched in sweat. I kept track. Night 1, I fell asleep in the booth. Woke up to the tray already wiped and no one around. Night 2, I saw a figure hiding behind the espresso machine. Night 3, I caught his reflection in the walk-in freezer glass, just for a heartbeat before it blinked away. They began leaving objects. A key, silver, old-fashioned, no tag, on the counter under the rotary phone, and a folded note, "You must open the ice chest before midnight." I threw them away, but the next night they were back. Same shelf, same order. I pocketed the key, took the note home. I couldn't eat. I was jittery, frantic. Someone knocking on my door at 2:30 a.m., just once. Always measured. No voice, just a tap. I texted my friend Laura. She works in corporate law. I told her I was seeing things. She laughed and reminded me of my load at work. She said I sounded tired. Maybe I was. 20 nights in, it happened again. The lights died just before 8. Clock stopped. I heard the chime of ice falling, like someone shattering cubes. The electrical hum came back, buzzing unsettled, like static between stations on a radio. When the lights returned, I nearly stepped on a rusted padlock sitting in the middle of the floor. I hadn't seen a freezer chest in the diner. I dropped it and backed away. Next morning, I spoke to the manager. I asked if she'd noticed anything odd. She looked at me like I was hyping for time. She mentioned the regular late-night customer. He wouldn't ask to be billed. He just sits and leaves sometimes. No one talks to him. No one knows who he is. She sounded bored. I didn't continue. That night, I decided to do something. I filled a mug with coffee and spilled it over the keyboard of the cash register. When 8 o'clock came and the lights blinked off, I heard the clank of metal on metal. I froze. Then I heard it again, a scraping, slow and hollow. The ice chest inside the storage room was supposed to be empty. No one ever stored food overnight. I walked toward the door, breathing shallow. I slipped through the door at 8:02, lid locked. The freezer smelled like old cuts and meat. The key was still in my coat pocket. I slid it in. Inside was darkness, but I also heard breathing. Soft, shallow, like someone lying in wait. I didn't look. I turned the key and felt the cold crack of ice against metal. The lid eased open, nothing visible. I stepped back and slammed it shut. And then I heard the voices. His, "Thank you." Hers, "You opened it." They hadn't moved, just beside the door, flat behind the fogged glass that coated it, dripping with frost. But I heard the words. I fled. I stopped turning the key in the lock. I threw it into a dumpster by the back alley. The next night, the key was just sitting on top as if someone placed it there with ceremony. Beside it was a folded note. Unlock the door behind the counter at midnight. I never went back to the freezer. Now it's 4 weeks since this started. I'm still working nights. Every time the clock threatens to reach 8, I break a plate. Anything to distract myself, dropping sugar packets, flipping menus, humming. I count down in my mind. 10 seconds, 5, 1. When it hits 8, the lights blink off, the clocks freeze, time fractures, and I feel their presence again. I've found myself at home, standing in front of my own freezer at midnight, my finger reaching for its handle. Sometimes the door creaks open, sometimes it doesn't. I keep the brass key in my pocket. I think I know what Pendleton and Macy were guarding. A threshold, not a door in my shop, but something inside me. Every night I wonder, when midnight comes, will I open it again? I used to think the worst thing about sleeping rough was the cold. I was wrong. It started behind the Wyndham Hotel, 3 blocks south of the museum. I'd hit that dumpster dozens of times before. Usually good for shampoo bottles, dented wine, sometimes a discarded bathrobe or towel that still held the ghost of warmth. But that morning, the air felt dense, like the alley was breathing. Tolis was already knee-deep in it, scooping with those calloused hands like a child digging for toys. I kept watch, glancing between the alley and the street. We didn't want trouble, especially not from Marty, the overzealous security guard who patrolled like he was the last soldier left in a forgotten war. Tolis climbed out empty-handed, grumbling about the heat and how the smell had ripened wrong. I thought he was just being dramatic, until I went in myself. The stench hit like a slap. Hot rot, urine, vinegar, and something sweet. Not in a good way, more like something meant to be hidden. I pulled my collar up over my mouth and pushed deeper. My hand brushed something solid, not metal, not wood, bone maybe. I yanked it out and held it to the light. A statuette, no taller than a wine bottle, pale stone, cold even in the heat. Red veins ran through it like dried blood and cracked ice. It was carved into a man, or something close to one, and the face, there wasn't just one. 4 faces, wrapped around the skull like petals around a bud. One sneering, one weeping, one laughing. The last was blank, not smooth, just unfinished. Like someone had started carving and then gave up halfway through. I stared at that one too long and felt something shift behind my eyes. I pocketed it, heart hammering. We needed a payday, and that thing screamed antique. Later, at our spot outside the old pawn shop, I handed it to Tolis while I smoked. He turned it over in his hands, whistled low. "That blank face kinda looks like you," he said with a grin. "Don't be stupid," I muttered, but when I looked again, I wasn't so sure. We waited until Maggie closed up shop. She used to buy from us, back before we brought her too much filth and too few treasures. But tonight, something had shifted. She let us in, didn't even scold us, just turned on the lights and asked what we had. When I placed the statuette on the counter, her expression changed. She picked it up, turned it once, then set it down like it had burned her. "Get out," she said. "Maggie," I said, "out. That thing's a mockery. You think this is funny?" We looked down. 2 of the faces, the sneering one and the weeping one, looked different, more familiar. Too familiar. Tolis leaned in first. "That's me. That smile. That's how I grin when I scam someone for a smoke." I looked at the angry one. Hook nose, patchy beard. Eyes sunken from too many sleepless nights. It was me. We didn't sleep that night. We barely spoke. I kept the statue close, wrapped in an old towel, but it didn't stay still. The blank face was changing. Each time I looked, it had more shape. By morning, it was Maggie. I wanted to throw it, smash it, burn it. But something in my gut told me it wouldn't help, that it would just come back. We returned to the pawn shop just past midnight. The lights were on. Back door cracked open like it was waiting for us. Inside, the hallway stank of mold and something wetter. Each step echoed wrong, like the air was stretched too thin. Maggie didn't respond when we called, but she was there, standing behind the counter like a puppet with its strings tangled. Her face twisted into a smile that didn't belong on a living person. Her skin peeled at the corners like it was coming loose. I almost ran. Tolis did run, but the front door wouldn't open. Then she dropped. Right behind the counter, gone. Silence swallowed the room until she crawled out. She didn't walk. She skittered. Her limbs jerked like she'd forgotten how to move like a person. Her mouth tore wider, skin splitting, until her face was nothing but teeth and red. We bolted, back through the corridor, past rooms that seemed too deep, too dark. Something followed, heavy and wet. Not just Maggie anymore, something else. We barely made it out, slammed the door behind us and pressed our backs to it, panting like dogs. The alley was quiet again. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't last. I pulled the statue from my coat. The faces had changed again. The 4th one, the one that had been blank, now had her mouth, her teeth, her hunger. Tolis looked at me, eyes wide. How do we stop it? I didn't have an answer. I still don't. But tonight, when I checked it again, I saw something worse. A 5th face is forming, and it's looking straight at me. I never saw myself as exceptional, not until others started telling me I was. My teachers, my cousins, the neighbors at the corner grocery, they all seemed to think I was destined for something greater. I suppose I tried to believe them, at least for a while. My parents took those words and etched them into my life like commandments. No sugar, no distractions, no deviation. Wake before 6 without an alarm, study until midnight. Piano at dawn, calculus by lunch, classical Mandarin recitation before bed, and always with a smile, because I was the boy who made everything look effortless. But when I turned 16, something shifted. I didn't break, at least not right away. I bent, like bamboo in wind, quiet, subtle. I started texting a classmate named Onli. She was vibrant in a way that made the world seem brighter. She joked about stealing street signs and memorized pop songs just to rewrite the lyrics into something absurd. She made me laugh. That alone felt like rebellion. I'd hide our messages under chemistry notes and slide my phone under the floorboard when my mother passed by. She had this way of entering a room without a sound, like a breath you forgot to take. "You should be more like Zhenyu," she'd whisper, voice full of pity. Zhenyu lived 2 houses down, a boy molded from legend. He had perfect grades, perfect posture, perfect silence. He never smiled unless spoken to and never spoke unless asked. My mother said he was exactly what a young man should be, focused, formidable, forgotten by nothing. "He's already enrolled in 3 universities," she'd remind me. "At your age, he was studying philosophy and English." That line rang in my ears like a chime that never stopped. At your age. When Onli and I were caught talking near the back of the school building, my parents descended like crows. I wasn't punished with violence, but with control. My schedule was doubled. My phone was taken. They even spoke with Onli's family, warning them that I was becoming a distraction. I could hear them arguing about me through the walls. "He's slipping," my father said. "He's wasting it all." "He's not Zhenyu," my mother hissed. But he could be. I couldn't sleep that night. I stared out the window and saw the lights in Zhenyu's room glowing faintly blue. It was always on, even at 3 in the morning. I wondered if he ever slept, or if he needed to. That's when I saw him. He stepped out into the street, barefoot, carrying a large box. He didn't walk like a boy. He moved like something older, slower, like he was swimming through syrup. He set the box down beneath the old fig tree near the curb, then vanished back inside. I should have let it go. I didn't. The next afternoon, when Zhenyu's family left for the temple, I crept over and opened that box. Inside was a book, not a school book. This one was hand-bound, thick with pages that smelled like salt and decay. The cover had no title, only a faint indentation, like something had leaned there for a very long time. I opened it. The pages weren't blank, but close. Each one held a single shape, drawn in careful black ink. Strange symbols I didn't recognize. Spirals within squares, triangles folded into themselves. On the inside back cover was a mirror. I didn't see myself in it. Only the room behind me, and something standing just behind my shoulder. I dropped the book. It didn't hit the ground. Instead, I felt the weight of it press against my chest, like it had been returned without movement. My fingers tingled, my vision doubled, and then everything felt manageable. That week, I accomplished more than I ever had. I studied without exhaustion, practiced piano with perfect tempo. My parents were thrilled, but they noticed other things too. "You're quieter now," my mother said. "You eat less," my father added. "Is that intentional?" I nodded both times, but I didn't remember doing either. The mirror and the book began showing more. Sometimes my bedroom, sometimes my school, but always with me in it. Different versions, doing different things. One would study while another played piano. A third would just sit, eyes closed, mouth moving without sound. It was never clear which one was really me. I stopped sleeping altogether. Instead, I would sit with the book open and split again and again, each part of me handling another task. Practicing, rehearsing, revising. I was always somewhere, always productive, but never whole. One evening, I looked across the street and saw Zhenyu at his window, staring at me. No expression, no acknowledgement, just stillness. Then he raised his hand and pointed, not at me, but behind me. I turned, slowly. In the mirror of the book, I saw another version of myself, but this one wasn't doing anything. He just stood there, unmoving, eyes hollow, mouth hanging open like it had forgotten how to form words. His skin was gray, not pale, not sick, just used up. When I looked back, he was gone. From the mirror, from the room, from me. The next day, I couldn't find my voice in class. My body was there taking notes, but my mind wandered, untethered, exhausted. I was splitting too often. I had let too many copies linger, and now I was starting to feel the cost. I tried to stop. I really did. I hid the book beneath the floorboard and tried to return to a single life. But I would wake up hearing pages turn in the dark. I'd look in the mirror and see 2 or 3 of me, blinking out of sync. My mother said I looked tired. Tired wasn't the word. I was evaporating. When the first nosebleed came, I didn't even notice it. Not until Anli pulled me aside and gasped. "Have you been sleeping?" she asked. I nodded. I lied. She reached into her bag and handed me a letter. "I've been writing you every day," she said, "since they took your phone." I didn't open it. I didn't want to ruin it. It felt like the last real thing I had. That night, I decided to return the book. I crossed the street after midnight. Genyu's light was off, his door unlocked. I crept inside holding the book in both hands, my breath short and shallow. His room was full of mirrors, hundreds of them, some cracked, some completely black, and in every one, a different version of him. Some screamed silently, others clawed at the glass, but one mirror showed only me, the version that hadn't slept, the one I'd left behind. He turned toward me. "You brought it back," he whispered. I nodded. "You kept it too long." I held out the book. His hands didn't move. "You have to take him back first," he said. I didn't understand. He stepped aside. In the far mirror, I saw myself, emaciated, shaking, eyes wide with something between fear and hunger. "He's yours," Genyu said. "You left him too long. You forgot to call him home." I stepped forward. My reflection grinned, and I felt myself pulled, slowly, like falling backward into deep water. Then everything stopped. I woke in my own bed, the book gone. Across the street, Genyu's room was empty. He'd moved away. No one saw him leave. My parents said nothing. They only told me how proud they were, how much I'd grown, how much more present I seemed. But I don't look in mirrors anymore. Not because I'm afraid of what I'll see, but because every now and then, when the room is quiet and the light is just right, I see someone else blink. And it isn't me. It started with the heat, the kind that settles behind your eyes and makes your skin feel tight. Rai said that was why we needed to find somewhere off the grid. Devil's Den was too full of tourists. The other springs were packed shoulder to shoulder with half the county. But this place, Hell's Gate, was supposed to be different. Underground, unmarked, sealed off for decades after too many divers never came back. I didn't question it. Rai had done everything from shipwrecks to tunnel dives. If he said it was safe enough, I believed him. We drove hours into the woods, off any paved road, into a stretch of pine that seemed to press inward the farther we went. By the time we reached the old clearing, the only sign left was a rotted plank nailed to a split post that read, "Danger, keep out." It looked more ceremonial than functional. Rai grinned like it was a challenge. There was nothing in the clearing at first. No cave, no structure, just moss and weeds and heat. Then he brushed aside some hanging vines near the tree line, and there it was, a hole in the ground, round and perfect, maybe 20 feet wide, rimmed in green with vines draped down into blackness. We stepped to the edge, and the drop hit like a punch to the chest. 30 feet down, the sunlight struck water so clear it looked artificial. I saw a dive platform, half sunk and rotting, swaying gently in the shadows below. He found an old rope ladder coiled beneath the moss. Mold slicked every rung. I didn't want to trust it, but he was already halfway down before I could say anything. I followed, more afraid of being left alone than the climb. The air got cooler the lower we dropped, and when my foot hit the platform, it felt soft in places, like wet cardboard. The water below didn't move. It just waited. We suited up fast. No small talk, no fanfare. I asked what the route was. He said, "Just follow the line. Don't let go." Then he was gone. I took one last look at the sunlit rim overhead, then jumped. The water swallowed the heat immediately, cold and silent. I could see forever. The walls curved down like a stone throat. I followed the dive line he'd left behind, passing through a tunnel that narrowed the farther it went. My tank scraped the limestone. My arms trembled from holding position. Then the tunnel opened. I drifted into a space that didn't make sense. No walls, no floor, just water and blackness. That's when I saw it. Deep gouges in the stone to my right. 4 of them, wide apart, too wide for any tool I'd ever seen. They dragged downward, deeper into the dark. I hovered, barely breathing. I tugged the line. One pull, nothing came back. Another pull, still nothing. I pushed forward. Visibility dropped the lower I went. The water thickened somehow. My beam barely reached my fingertips. Then the line ended. Not slack, not frayed. Cut, clean. Panic sat in my chest like a stone. I hovered, weightless, trying to think. The water around me stirred without a source. I looked down, and the sand below had shifted, not naturally. Something had moved through. There were prints in the silt. Not boots, not fins. Long, curved impressions with webbing between them, each the size of a dinner plate. I should have turned back then, but Rye was still down there. I pulled out my backup spool and tied it to the end of his cut line, kicked forward. The prints led deeper, where even the silt seemed reluctant to settle. Something brushed my leg. I whipped around. Nothing but black. Then something hit my shoulder. Solid, fast. I dropped the spool. My light spun into the void. I was blind. My hand found the main line and clamped down. I began to climb, one hand over the next. I kicked gently, steadily, listening to my breath rise like a tide in my ears. Then I felt it. A pull on the rope behind me. Once, then again. I stopped breathing. I didn't turn. I just climbed. The water rushed around me like a heartbeat. Faster, closer. I reached the narrow tunnel. I couldn't take my tank through. I ditched it, took one last breath, and shoved myself in. The walls scraped my shoulders. My hips jammed. I twisted, kicked, panicked. Then something grabbed my ankle. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My lungs locked. I kicked once, twice. My heel hit something wet and hard. It let go. I clawed forward, scraping the rock until my hands broke through the surface. I gasped air. Real air. I was back on the platform. Face up, mask cracked, no tank, no Rye. I looked down into the water. Beneath the platform, something moved. A head broke the surface. Gray, slick, not human. Its eyes were too far apart. It looked at me, blinked once, then slipped back into the dark. I didn't imagine it. I know what I saw. It saved me, but it didn't bring Rye back. Now I'm in my car, engine running, hands shaking. I should call someone. I should report what happened, but I can't explain it. I think that thing let me go because it knew I'd never come back, and I won't. The box came from a farmhouse scheduled for demolition. My uncle ran clean-out crews for abandoned properties, and every so often he let me pick through the junk before they brought in the dumpsters. Usually it was chipped dishes, moldy books, broken clocks. This time, it was a weathered cedar crate stashed beneath a collapsed staircase. Looked like something from a century ago. Inside were letters, hundreds of them, folded neatly, sealed by hand, each one addressed in faint pencil to Mother and Father. The dates started in the late 60s and ran for decades. They were written by someone named Joel. I sat in my bedroom that night, peeling them open one by one, expecting war stories or dusty confessions. But they read like messages from a child, written in the shaky grammar of someone barely out of grade school. The first few sounded innocent enough. Joel getting lost in the woods, finding shelter, meeting someone he called the Quiet Woman. I didn't sleep that night. I read almost 50 of them. They changed quickly. At first he was just lonely. Then came the rituals, covering himself in ash, placing bones in circles, whispering prayers to something in the bark. Joel's tone shifted too. He stopped asking for help and started warning his parents to stay away. By the sixth letter, he claimed the woman lived in a hollowed-out elm and never blinked. By the 10th, he said she was afraid of mirrors, that she locked them all in a chest and buried it under her floor. I brought the box to my cousin Eli the next day. He was a skeptic about everything. Ghosts, demons, anything you couldn't measure or punch in the face. I thought showing him would make me feel less crazy. He didn't laugh, didn't even smirk. He read one of the later letters, looked at the date, and told me his dad had worked on that same property in the 90s. Said he remembered Joel's name from a list of people the owners claimed had gone missing there. That night, I read more. Joel said the woman began making him write letters with sap mixed into the ink, that the trees were watching and needed to drink his memories. He said she fed him things that didn't have names, that looked like roots until they moved. The more he obeyed, the deeper her cabin sank into the ground. The last letter in the stack ended with a single sentence. "I think she's inside me now." Eli told me to burn them, said there were too many details, things only someone who'd lived there could know. He wasn't scared, exactly, but he was uneasy. I could see it in his eyes. He offered to bring a fire pit over, light the whole box in his driveway. I agreed, but when the moment came, I didn't move. I couldn't. Watching Eli drop the first handful of letters into the flames, I felt something break loose in my head. I lunged at him, knocked him into the gravel, took the box and ran like an animal. That night, I read the letters again. I began to hear things behind the drywall, scratching, low hums like bees buried in the insulation. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. All I wanted was to get through the stack. Then the new one arrived. Slid under my door with no postage, same handwriting, same pencil. To whoever is reading these now, she doesn't like being forgotten. She's close to the surface again. If you don't stop, you'll help her finish coming through. I stayed up for 2 days straight after that. The letters were scattered around my bed, my desk, the floor. I noticed smudges on the paper, faint prints like tree rings. My bathroom mirror cracked down the middle, though no one touched it. The smell of wet bark filled my apartment. Eli came back with bolt cutters, said if I didn't answer, he'd break down the door. I let him in. He took one look at me, shaking, sunken, surrounded by those letters, and said I looked like I'd been buried. He made me get in his truck, told me we were driving to the property, said it had to end where it started. The land was fenced, posted with no trespassing signs, but we jumped it, hiked through the brittle grass to the woods behind the barn. Eli had a crowbar, I had the box. When we found the ruins of what might have been her cabin, it wasn't the foundation that struck me, it was the hole in the earth. Not a well, not a sinkhole, a perfect circle, about 10 feet across, lined with roots that pulsed like veins. Something inside was breathing. I stepped forward, I couldn't help it. The box slipped from my fingers and fell into the opening. Not clattered, fell, as if there was no bottom. Then a voice whispered from the hole, not aloud, inside my skull. "You kept them alive." I turned and ran. Eli had already taken off. I followed the sound of his boots slamming the underbrush. We didn't stop until the truck was in sight. Since then, the letters haven't come back, but I still hear tapping behind the walls at night. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I see that same circle in the ground, pulsing like a wound that hasn't finished bleeding. I think she's still watching, and I think she remembers me. I used to spend weekends exploring forgotten places. It wasn't anything dangerous. Old diners, closed-off park buildings, roadside motels with for sale signs that had been sun-bleached beyond legibility. I wasn't breaking into high-risk sites or chasing urban legends. I just liked peeling back history a little. If I found a photo album, a newspaper, a receipt taped to a mirror, it felt like discovering someone's abandoned time capsule. That was the appeal for me. Quiet things left behind. But the last place I visited changed the way I see silence. It made me realize silence isn't always passive. Sometimes it listens. There was a small town about 40 minutes from where I grew up. I remembered it from road trips as a kid, mostly because of the crooked water tower and a diner that used to serve bright green milkshakes during the summer. When I passed through recently, the diner had long since closed. The town was barely hanging on. I parked across from an old post office that had been boarded up and decided to stretch my legs. That's when I noticed the house. It sat alone at the end of a short gravel lane. 2 stories, wide front porch, badly faded siding. The structure looked older than anything else on the block, like it had been built before the road was paved. The windows were intact, but dirty. I stood at the edge of the sidewalk for a while, just watching. There was something about the stillness that drew me in. No movement in the trees, no birds, not even the sound of wind brushing against the leaves. I walked up the gravel slowly, not sure I was going to enter, but wanting to see it closer. The front door was ajar, just slightly. I stepped onto the porch. The wood felt soft beneath my feet, like it had absorbed years of water and never dried. I pushed the door inward and called out, more out of habit than actual concern. No answer. The smell hit me first, musty, old paper, something metallic. Not quite blood, but close enough to trigger the association. The inside was colder than outside, like the walls were holding on to winter. My flashlight beam danced over torn furniture, yellowed wallpaper, and an upright piano with a cracked lid. I took a few steps in. The air felt dense, like there wasn't enough oxygen. I moved toward the hallway, stopping briefly in what used to be a living room. On the mantel, a row of black and white photographs had been turned face down. I paused, then turned one of them over. The image showed a boy, maybe 6 years old, standing in front of the same piano behind me. His expression was blank, not quite frowning, but deeply unreadable. I couldn't explain why it unsettled me, but it did. I put the photo back face down and continued down the hallway. I spent close to 20 minutes exploring. The second floor was mostly empty. One of the rooms had a twin bed, stripped of its mattress, and a stack of cardboard boxes full of books with water-damaged covers. Nothing out of the ordinary, but something felt wrong. There was a constant awareness that I wasn't alone, even though I never heard movement. I kept checking the stairwell, expecting to hear creaking floorboards, but nothing came. Then I entered the master bedroom, and everything changed. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air dropped in temperature. I could see my breath, every noise I had grown used to. The faint wind through the broken upstairs window, the occasional creak of wood cut off. My ears rang from the sudden quiet. I stood there, blinking, trying to adjust. Dust hung in the air, unmoving. Even the beam of my flashlight seemed dulled, like it couldn't quite illuminate the far corners of the room. And then I noticed something behind the closet door. It wasn't movement. It was presence. I can't explain it well, but it felt like the air had density there, like something was waiting behind the thin slab of wood. I stared at it, my body tensed. I thought about opening the door, but something deeper in me knew better. Instead, I backed out of the room slowly, never turning away. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, the sounds returned. Faint wind, settling boards. But it was wrong. The rhythm was different. The house wasn't returning to what it was before. It was reacting to me. I picked up my pace, made it halfway down the stairs when I heard it. A single note on the piano. It was low, sour, slightly out of tune, and drawn out longer than any key should have held. I froze. My pulse hitched. I turned and looked down the stairs, but the living room was still. The piano hadn't moved. Nothing had. But I knew what I heard. It wasn't imagination. I started back down, cautiously, unsure if I was about to confront someone or something. When I reached the bottom, everything looked untouched. The photograph I turned over was still in place. The piano was exactly how I'd left it. But the keys, they had dust on them. Thick, undisturbed dust. There were no fingerprints, no sign of impact. That key had not been pressed in years. I left the room and made my way to the back of the house. That's when I saw the second staircase. It wasn't on any blueprint I'd seen online, and it didn't match the layout. It was narrower, poorly lit, and led downward into the earth. A basement, maybe, but the angle was strange, too steep. I told myself not to go down. I told myself I had already seen enough, but I went anyway. The steps were stone, uneven and cold. My flashlight beam shook with my hand. About halfway down, the smell changed. It was stronger now. Not rot, not mold, something else entirely. Something like rusted coins and wet soil. The staircase opened into a wide chamber, much larger than any basement should have been. The walls were covered in old fabric, hanging loosely like theater curtains, stained and moth-eaten. In the center of the room was a large mirror, not mounted, not part of any furniture, just standing there unsupported, reflecting the beam of my flashlight back at me. I walked toward it, every step feeling heavier than the last. My reflection looked normal at first, just me, flashlight in hand, breathing heavy. But then the background started to shift. Behind my reflection, the hallway appeared, but it was different, longer, darker, and empty. Then something stepped into the frame behind me. I turned so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. The room was still empty. No one was there. I looked back at the mirror. The figure was gone. I backed away. That was when I noticed the dust on the floor. My footprints were the only ones, except near the mirror. There was a trail, bare feet, leading away from it into the hanging fabric on the far wall. I didn't follow them. I ran. I took the stairs 2 at a time. When I reached the main floor, the light from the front door was gone. I don't mean it was dark outside. I mean the doorway itself had vanished. Where it once stood was now a blank wall, seamless, as if it had never been there at all. I turned in circles, trying to find another exit. The hallway stretched longer than I remembered. The layout had changed. Rooms were in the wrong places. The piano was gone. The photographs had been cleared from the mantel, and the air felt alive, like the walls were holding their breath. That's when the sound returned. It was not a piano this time. It was a slow, steady tapping, like fingers on wood. Then a pause, then 3 loud knocks. I pressed myself against the wall, heart racing. The knocks came again, closer. I turned and ran toward where the kitchen had been. There was a window there. Even if I had to smash it open, I needed to get out. But the kitchen wasn't there. It was another hallway now, this one lined with mirrors. Every 10 feet, another tall glass panel, reflecting not just me, but slightly distorted versions of the house. In each reflection, the hallway was longer, the shadows deeper, and in one I saw something standing at the far end. Tall, pale, still. I didn't wait to see if it moved. I picked a direction and ran. The house didn't want me to leave. I knew that. But eventually, I found a door I hadn't tried. It looked like a supply closet, but when I opened it, I felt cold air on my face. It led outside. I didn't question it. I bolted. The sky had changed. What had been late afternoon was now a deep, cloudless night. There were no stars, no moon, just black above and dirt below. I ran until the house was a memory behind me. When I got back to my car, it was nearly dawn. I had lost time. My phone was dead. My watch had stopped. But the gravel still clung to my shoes, and my hands still shook with the same numb terror I'd felt inside. That house isn't on the satellite view anymore. I checked a few days later. It's just empty land now. No foundation, no structure. Like it was never there. But every so often, when everything goes quiet, unnaturally quiet, I feel that pressure again. That pause in sound. And I remember the look of my own reflection turning away from me. I never liked being in that apartment after dark. It was small, poorly lit, and surrounded on both sides by other buildings that felt too close, like they were leaning in. I moved there after the breakup, mostly because I couldn't afford anything else, and also because I didn't really care anymore. It had a strange layout, long, narrow hallways and windows that looked directly into brick walls. The bedroom had one of those old metal radiators that clanked for no reason. even when it wasn't on. I got used to the noise after a few weeks, but I never got used to the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just paranoia. It was that quiet, prickling sense of something standing right behind you every time the lights were off. That feeling of not being alone, even when you knew you were. I started going for long walks around the neighborhood to avoid being inside. I'd throw on a jacket, put in my earbuds, and wander until I was too tired to think. Most nights, I didn't even listen to anything. I'd just let the earbuds stay in to keep people from trying to talk to me. The area wasn't exactly safe, but I didn't care. I figured if someone wanted to take my phone or wallet, they could have it. I didn't have much worth stealing anyway. The streets got pretty quiet after 10 o'clock, especially near the old train yard. That's where I found myself more and more often. It was abandoned, half fenced off, and overgrown with weeds. I liked it because it was quiet, completely cut off from traffic and street noise. Just the occasional buzz of a street lamp and the distant hum of a passing train. One night in early fall, I ended up there again. I didn't plan on going that far, but my feet kept moving. The air was crisp and the sky was clear enough to see stars for once. I remember walking past the rusted gate and stepping onto the gravel, the sound crunching under my boots. There were a few old freight cars still sitting on the tracks, covered in graffiti, rusted through in places, the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a junkyard. I climbed up onto one of them and sat with my legs dangling over the edge, drinking from a bottle of cheap whiskey I'd stuffed into my coat. I wasn't planning to get drunk, just numb enough to not feel anything. I stayed there for a while, letting the cold sink in through my clothes. I started thinking about things I shouldn't have. Old fights, missed calls, things I said that I couldn't take back. I felt that pressure again, the one that builds up behind your eyes when your mind won't shut off. I got down from the car and walked deeper into the yard, away from the street lights, into the darker parts where the weeds grew taller. That's when I noticed it. A light flickering near the far end of the lot. It wasn't a street light. It looked more like a flashlight or maybe a lantern. I should have turned around. I didn't. I kept walking, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The light wasn't steady. It pulsed slowly, like someone turning a dimmer switch back and forth. As I got closer, I could see it was coming from inside one of the smaller maintenance sheds. The door was cracked open slightly, and the light spilled out onto the gravel like a pale orange puddle. I don't know why I went up to it. Maybe part of me wanted something to happen, a break from the numbness, or maybe I was just too tired to care. I approached the door and pushed it open a little farther. The hinges groaned. Inside, the shed was almost empty, except for a few broken chairs and a pile of old rail ties stacked in the corner. The light was coming from a small battery lantern sitting on the floor, and standing just a few feet beyond it was a man. His back was turned to me. He wasn't moving. He looked like he was facing the wall, but his head was tilted slightly, like he was listening. I felt a jolt of adrenaline, a tight clenching in my chest. I wanted to step back, but something held me there. I said, "Hey," quiet but loud enough that he should have heard. No reaction. I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. That's when I noticed something wasn't right. His posture was too still, not tense, not relaxed, just off. The kind of stillness that feels wrong when you see it in a living person. I reached for my phone, but my hand was shaking, and I dropped it on the gravel. The sound echoed through the shed like a firecracker. He didn't turn around. Instead, he shifted slightly to the left, then stopped again. It was such a small motion, but it made my skin crawl. I backed away slowly, step by step, until I reached the door. I didn't turn my back on him. When I finally stepped outside, I grabbed my phone, stuffed it in my pocket, and walked fast in the direction I'd come from. I didn't look back until I was near the edge of the yard. The shed was dark again. The light had gone out. I left the train yard and didn't go back for a week, but that wasn't the end of it. A few nights later, I was lying on my mattress, staring at the ceiling. The radiator was ticking softly. The rest of the apartment was dead silent. I hadn't been able to sleep since that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man's silhouette, frozen in that weird half-turn, just standing there, waiting. I started keeping a kitchen knife by the bed. Not that I thought it would help, but it gave me something to hold. Then just after 4 o'clock, I heard a sound. Faint, metallic, like something tapping against glass. I sat up. It came again, a little louder this time. I got up and walked to the window. It faced the alley behind the building. Nothing was there. I stood there for a while, watching the shadows stretch and shift under the security lights. I was about to walk away when I saw something move. Not a person, just a shape. It passed between the dumpsters and disappeared behind the opposite building. I couldn't be sure what it was, but it moved too smoothly, too slowly. The next morning, I called my landlord to ask if the alley had cameras. He said no. Just the lights. I tried to laugh it off, told myself I was overtired and imagining things. But that feeling didn't go away. It stayed with me, like something just under the surface, waiting. I stopped walking at night. I stayed home. I kept every light in the apartment on, even when I slept. But the feeling only got worse. A week later, I found the first note. It was slid under my door while I was in the shower. No envelope. Just a folded piece of lined paper with a single sentence written in block letters. You should have left it alone. I stood there dripping wet, towel wrapped around my waist, staring at those words until the paper soaked through from my hands. I didn't call the police. I knew what they'd say. I had no proof, no witnesses, and I'd already made a reputation as the quiet guy upstairs who barely spoke. I threw the note in the trash, locked every door and window, and pushed my dresser in front of the front door. That night, I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, I woke up on the floor of my living room. My arms were sore and my throat felt dry and scratched, like I'd been screaming. I didn't remember falling asleep. The lights were still on. The knife was still in my hand, but the front door was wide open. The dresser had been shoved aside, not tipped over. Just gently slid out of the way. That was the moment I knew this wasn't in my head. I moved out 3 days later, packed everything I could carry into my car, and drove 5 hours north to stay with my cousin. I didn't explain, I just said I needed a place for a while. He gave me the spare room and didn't ask questions. The first few nights were calm. I tried to convince myself it was over, that whatever I saw, whatever I stirred up had stayed behind. But then, just after midnight on the 4th night, I heard it again. That sound. The soft tap of something brushing against glass. I got up and walked to the window. His house was in a wooded area, surrounded by tall trees and no neighbors nearby. I scanned the yard. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I spotted it. A man, standing at the edge of the woods. Same height, same posture, still as stone. He didn't move, didn't wave, didn't say anything, just watched. And as I stood there, too afraid to blink, a single thought pushed into my mind. Not like a memory, more like a message. A cold, intrusive certainty that didn't belong to me. You brought it with you. I used to think that I understood what it meant to be alone in the woods. That silence. That heavy stillness in the trees when the wind dies and all the animals hold their breath. But what happened last February changed that. I've never felt real isolation until that day, and I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable in the mountains again. I live in central Washington, where the Cascades divide the world into wet green forests and dry pine deserts. There's a state preserve about an hour north of me, hidden behind winding logging roads and private timber gates. It isn't a place you find by accident. My coworker, Travis, showed it to me a couple years ago. We both worked for a small utility contractor, and we'd use the trails to blow off steam on weekends or take lunch breaks there when our job site was close enough. It became something like a ritual. a little pact between us. No phones, no talking about work, no GPS, just the trail, the trees, and whatever the mountain decided to offer. There was one particular trail that looped around a series of switchbacks before flattening out into an old-growth grove. The pines there were massive, spaced far enough apart that the sun could actually reach the floor, but tall enough to block the wind. It was always quiet, clean. It felt untouched, like it was ours alone. That February, Travis was out on medical leave after a back injury, so I started hiking the loop alone. I never worried about safety. The trail was familiar. I knew where the snow tended to build up and how to spot cougar tracks. I carried bear spray and a flare pen, and always left my truck parked visibly near the entrance, locked with a bright orange tarp over the cab. In my mind, I was being cautious, responsible. But looking back, I realized how stupid I was to think I understood that place. It started on a Monday. I'd been hauling gear out to a pump station at the base of the ridge and had about 30 minutes to kill before a crew showed up. I figured I could do a quick out and back hike, just enough to clear my head. The snow had mostly melted, except in the shaded bends of the trail. I didn't see another truck on the way in. The air was dry, maybe 30 degrees, with no wind at all. Just the steady crunch of my boots on frozen dirt and the occasional scrape of ice against rock. I was about 15 minutes in when I noticed something that didn't belong. A single trail of boot prints heading the same direction as me, but spaced wider than mine. Whoever made them had a longer stride. At first, I didn't think anything of it. There were old fire roads and game trails that crossed the ridge. Maybe someone else had come through early. But the longer I followed the tracks, the more I started to notice how erratic they were. There were stretches where the prints weaved from one side of the trail to the other. Sometimes they doubled back, as if the person had stopped and changed their mind. And then there were the spots where they disappeared entirely, only to reappear 10 or 15 feet farther along, like they'd hopped across a patch of snow to avoid leaving a mark. That alone should have set me back. But I told myself it didn't mean anything. People did weird things out here all the time. I kept walking until I hit the grove. The trees there stand in a kind of wide circle with broken boulders and stumps scattered like a natural amphitheater. I sat down on one of the flatter rocks, pulled out a granola bar, and let my body cool off. It was dead quiet. No wind, no birds, no distant cracking of branches, just silence. Not peaceful silence, more like the kind that presses in from all sides, like a vacuum. Then I heard the sound. It came from farther up the trail, beyond the crest, where the forest gets denser and the slope narrows into switchbacks. It wasn't a voice. Not exactly. More like a syllable, dragged out and swallowed by the trees. A low, falling tone, almost like someone trying to speak through a throat full of water. I stood up and scanned the ridge, expecting to see someone step out, but there was no movement, no color, just snow-dusted bark and empty air. I told myself it was a tree creaking, maybe a frozen branch snapping in the sun, but I knew what those sounded like. This was different. It had rhythm, a human cadence. I waited, motionless, for nearly 5 minutes before the quiet settled again. When I turned around to leave, the prints were gone. I walked back down the trail the exact way I came. I know that because I looked for my own boot tracks. They were there, just as I'd made them. But the second trail, the one with the long stride, was gone. Not melted, not covered. Gone, like whoever made them had never existed. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear exactly, but with a kind of uncertainty I couldn't shake. Something was wrong, but I couldn't explain what. Back at the truck, I unlocked the door with shaky fingers and sat behind the wheel longer than usual. I didn't feel watched. That wasn't it. I felt erased. Like I'd walked through a scene that had been staged, and now the props were gone. The tarp was still on the cab. Nothing had been touched. But it felt different. I didn't go back the rest of that week. When Travis returned to work, I told him the trail had washed out from the snowmelt. He didn't ask questions. But that Saturday, I found myself back on the same road, parked in the same turnout, watching steam rise off the hood of my truck as I debated whether to try again. I told myself it would be fine with company, that I'd been tired, that I'd misread the snow. Travis wasn't much for hiking anymore, so he waited in the truck while I jogged out to check the grove. I told him I'd be back in 20 minutes. He nodded, buried in a sports podcast, and didn't even look up as I left. This time, there were no other prints on the trail, no sound either. But as I reached the grove, I noticed something buried in the snow near the base of a stump, a bit of red poking through the powder. I knelt down and brushed it clean. It was a bandana, worn, frayed at the corners, and stained with something dark along the edge. I didn't recognize it. I hadn't seen anyone wearing red on the trail that year. I stood up, holding it loosely, unsure if I should leave it or bring it back. Then, again, that same low sound echoed across the grove. Closer this time. Clearer. It wasn't a word, but it wasn't random either. It had breath behind it. Pain. Like someone trying to yell with a collapsed lung. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, expecting movement. But nothing shifted. No birds rose, no branches bent. Still, I could feel that I wasn't alone. I dropped the bandana and backed away. My boots slid in the slush, breaking the crust of snow in uneven chunks. I didn't run. I wanted to, but I couldn't. Something in the air told me not to. Like the trees themselves were listening. I made it back to the truck and didn't speak for the entire ride down. Travis asked if I found anything, and I lied. I said the grove was flooded. He nodded and turned the radio back up. That night, I had a dream. I was standing in the grove again, but the trees were wrong, twisted, leaning toward me. The snow was gone, and the ground was soft, wet. I could hear that sound again, closer now, behind me, circling slowly. When I turned to look, I saw a figure just at the edge of vision. A tall man with a long stride, walking a loop around the grove without ever looking up. His mouth was open, but no sound came out, just that same broken syllable playing on repeat. I woke up covered in sweat, my hands numb. I stayed on the couch with the lights on until the sun rose. I haven't been back to that trail since. 2 weeks later, I saw a post on a local forum. Someone had found a pile of gear stashed under a downed tree just off the trailhead. Boots, an old parka, some empty water bottles, and a handheld radio that had run out of battery. No ID, no tags. The gear looked used but not abandoned. No signs of struggle. Just a note, written in permanent marker on the inside flap of the parka's lining. It read, "Do not follow the sound." I didn't respond to the thread, I didn't bookmark it, I didn't even show it to Travis. But I knew, without any doubt, that it had something to do with what I heard that day. The cadence, the echo, the rhythm of something pretending to call for help. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't drive with my windows down, and I never leave without telling someone exactly where I'm going. Because I know what I heard in those trees. And whatever it wasn't human. It just sounded close enough. I grew up in a quiet town that sat between two wooded ridges, with a narrow river running through the valley below. The place wasn't much, just a scattering of neighborhoods, a single grocery store, and a lot of overgrown land nobody seemed to own. When I was younger, I used to wander those trails with my brother, but after he moved out, I stopped going near the river. I'm not really sure why. Something about it just felt less friendly the older I got. That changed earlier this spring, when I started working night shifts at a warehouse on the far edge of town. To shave time off my commute, I cut through a service road that traced the river's edge. It was barely lit, full of potholes and dips, and usually dead silent after 10 o'clock. But it got me home 20 minutes faster, so I didn't complain. The first few weeks were fine. I'd roll the window down and let the air in while coasting along the empty road. I liked the quiet, It was the only time I didn't feel like someone was breathing down my neck at work. But one night, around 2:45 in the morning, I noticed something strange. I was driving slow, maybe 30 miles an hour, when I saw movement just beyond the tree line. It wasn't an animal. It was upright, tall. I only caught a glimpse of it through the trees, but it was moving alongside my car, keeping pace through the undergrowth. At first I thought it might be someone jogging, but no one runs back there that late. There's no trail, just a steep slope and thorns. I hit the brakes and scanned the tree line, trying to get a better look. Everything had gone still, not just outside, but in the air too. My ears popped slightly, like there was pressure building. I waited, engine idling, headlights aimed toward the shoulder. But whatever I saw was gone. I convinced myself it was a trick of the eyes, a branch swaying. Maybe a deer upright on its hind legs. I didn't want to think too hard about it, so I kept driving. But from that night on, I stopped rolling the window down. A few days later, something even stranger happened. I was heading home just after 3 o'clock. It was a quiet ride until I reached the stretch that ran parallel to the river. That's when my radio started glitching. Static at first, then a burst of some distorted voice, just loud enough to jolt me. I turned the volume down, then off, but it kept pulsing through, like it wasn't coming from the speakers. I pulled over at the next clearing, just a small gravel turnout used by fishermen during the day. I killed the engine and stepped out, thinking maybe the electrical system was shot. The night was still. No wind, no bugs, just silence, and that strange pressure again, like the air was too dense. I walked a few feet toward the riverbank and instantly regretted it. The water was too calm, completely still, like glass. And right there at the edge where the ground dipped down to the reeds, I saw prints. Not boots, not shoes, just bare feet. Wide, flat, slightly off. They were facing the water as if someone had walked straight in. But there were no return prints, no drag marks, nothing. I backed up fast, got in my car, and drove the long way home. Added 20 minutes, but I didn't care. I didn't take the river road again for over a week. Then came the night that locked everything into place. It was a Friday. We'd had a brutal shift at the warehouse, extra trucks, low staff, machines acting up. By the time I clocked out, my head was pounding. I considered sleeping in my car, but decided to power through. I thought if I took the river road and just kept my eyes on the center line, I could get home quick and crash. I wish I hadn't. It was 3:20 a.m. when I made the turn onto the service road. The trees pressed in tight. Headlights barely touched more than a few feet ahead. I rolled past the usual mile marker, hands tight on the wheel. I tried not to glance toward the tree line, but I felt something, not saw, felt. A weight, like being watched, but more physical. Like someone was pressing their palms against the inside of my skull. Then I saw it. Middle of the road. No warning, just a person standing there, facing my car. I hit the brakes hard, tires screeching. The car jolted to a stop, maybe 15 feet from where it stood. No movement, no response. Just a tall silhouette, backlit by my headlights. The strange thing was how dry it looked, like it hadn't come from the woods or the water. Just standing there, waiting. I should have reversed, should have turned around, but I didn't. I sat there, both hands on the wheel, frozen. Then it moved, not toward me, just sideways, one slow step at a time, off the road, back into the trees. I stayed parked for another 30 seconds, maybe more. Then stupidly, I rolled forward. I don't know what I was expecting to find, but the road was empty again. No one, no prints, just that same eerie pressure in the air and a slight smell, like damp cloth or old metal. When I got home, the air felt wrong. The kitchen was humid, like someone had been boiling water, but all the burners were off. I checked every room, nothing out of place. No open windows, just silence. Then I saw the footprints. Wet ones right inside the front door, faint but clear, like someone had stepped in with soaked bare feet. They stopped halfway into the hallway and disappeared. I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with the lights on, phone in hand, staring at the doorway. Around 4:45 a.m., I got the urge to cook. Not out of hunger, more like a craving. Specifically, fried eggs. I hate fried eggs. I've never liked the smell. But in that moment, it was all I could think about. I almost got up to do it when I remembered something my grandfather used to say. He was from the old country, believed in spirits, forest things. He once told me that when something follows you home, it can try to make you let it in. And if it can't talk to you, it finds other ways. Cravings, sounds, familiar smells. I didn't cook the eggs. I lit one of his old candles instead. One of the thick ones he brought from his village that smelled like dried leaves and stone. I didn't think it would do anything, but as soon as I lit it, the air shifted again. That pressure snapped, like a balloon popping, and for the first time in hours, I felt alone in the house. That would have been enough. I should have stopped there, but I didn't. The next night, I tried to prove to myself that it was just exhaustion. I drove back down the river road just before midnight. I figured if I made the trip early, when my brain was still sharp, I'd feel different. I was wrong. About halfway through, my headlights flickered. Not the bulbs, just the output, like something was crossing in front of them. I slowed down and saw the same silhouette again. This time off the road, standing just a few feet into the woods. I didn't stop. I didn't even blink. I pressed the gas and kept driving until I hit the main road. That was the last time I used the river route. But the cravings didn't stop. Every night just after 3 o'clock, I'd wake up with the urge to fry something. Oil-based, heavy. I started to feel sick during the day, but wide awake at night. I tried to break the pattern. Sleep during different hours, unplug the stove, even stay at my friend's place, but nothing helped. The worst part came 2 weeks later. I got home from a late shift and found a bowl on the counter. It was full of oil, used, still warm, but I'd locked the door. No one else had a key, and I hadn't cooked in days. I dumped the bowl and left the house that night. Drove out to the next town, slept in my car near a motel parking lot. I stayed out there for 3 nights straight. When I came back, the bowl was gone. I burned every candle my grandfather left me. I scrubbed the floor with salt and vinegar. I haven't used the stove since. That was 6 weeks ago. And though nothing's shown up in the woods or followed me down the road again, I still wake up at 3 o'clock. Always 3 o'clock. And I still smell the oil. Every single night. I don't know what it wanted. I don't know what it saw in me. But it hasn't left. Not really. And whatever it is, I think it's waiting for me to get hungry enough to open the door again.